Howdy class, this video is on the structure of a C++ program and what it is comprised of. And what are all of these components and what is the weird syntax surrounding these statements? Now, syntax is just another word for, what collection or combination of characters there is that will form something meaningful or something that the program is going to be able to understand and execute. So we'll take a look at these items here in this video. First of all, the include statement that gives us access to other libraries that aren't part of the standard C++ library. The namespace statement is something that's going to be advanced. We're not going to deal with it at all, but for our purposes, a namespace is something that is going to allow us to use a defined set of definition for common programming tasks. That's a good way to look at it. Braces will always be used to bind or mark the beginning and the end of a code block. Every code block needs to be indented for readability. It's not required for compilation, but it is required for readability. We'll talk about semicolons and how they are critical because they delineate the end of a C++ instruction. And then finally, what this int main and return 0 stuff is going to look like. So let me start with a slide that's part of the abbreviated set of Chapter 2 PowerPoints. I try and just reduce all of those down to just the facts, but I still want to give you access to the entire suite of PowerPoints for your own reading, education, and files. So here are the things that we're trying to work through in this module. That include statement is the very first thing. The namespace statement is the next thing. Int main, the beginning brace, and then some statements inside, and then an ending brace. So looking at that, we will, let me get this working here. And then looking at that, we'll see that there are a number of syntax characters that we'll have to start to wrestle with and memorize because these will be in use for quite a while. We'll be using these really until the end of our programming journey. So all of those will be required. Okay, here is a simple program in C++. You'll see this all through Chapter 2. And this is actually what we did for Lab 1. Is we just simply did a text replacement here. But let's start taking a look at these things. First of all, the include statement, that is this right here. And that is going to give us access to additional libraries in C++. As time goes on in our course, we'll see that we will start including many other types of libraries, such as io_manip is going to be the first. We may do some advanced operations needing some other library, maybe some math operators. So that's where we would specify just what those other external libraries are. But for right now, to get us started, we're just going to use the standard library, and this is IO_stream, and that stands for input-output stream. And that allows the computer to actually output something and input something. Now, as I mentioned before, this next statement here, this using namespace standard, is a common thing, a common statement, especially at lower levels of programming. And this just simply provides a definition for where these words are going to be defined and able to be translated into action. So, for example, the standard namespace is where we would see things like, well, where is COUT, C-O-U-T, that we see in line 5 here? Well, where is that defined and what is that? The standard namespace is where we would look for those definitions. Okay, our next thing to look at here is this int main. Now, that's technically a function, but we won't get to functions for a good number of weeks here. So for now, we just sort of need to accept that, yep, this is a function. Int means the function is expecting a returned value, and that's what we get here with this return 0. We're going to return a value, and we can even see that this number right here, 0, is in fact an integer, and that has to match whatever we said right here. But that's beyond the scope of this first week stuff. For now, what we will need to know is that all of our coding, when we start out, will be inside this main function. Now, it's literally called a main function, and you'll see in C++ that functions like main here will always have parentheses behind them, and that delineates that this is a function and not some kind of a variable. Later, when we start looking at functions in more detail and start passing arguments to functions, well, that's where we'll eventually do that. But for right now, we're just going to use these functions as they are with no arguments. And that means that we'll have open and closed parentheses. We still have to put them in, even if there's nothing inside the parentheses. Again, that's to show that this is a function. Let's see, our code here has got exactly one line, and this is an output statement. COUT is the instruction we use. Let me use a little different color here. Let's do that. COUT is going to be an instruction that we use for console out. C is for console, OUT is for out, and this simply gives output to the console. Now, what do we mean by the console? Well, that's literally this section over here in your Replit integrated development environment. The console is where we do our primary interaction with the program, either both input and receiving output. Now, for our purposes, we're going to just use this standard template for most of our programming in this class. So just memorize it and get to the point where you can just crank it out at the beginning of any assignment. Now, in C++, braces are critical. Braces are going to be used to define a code block. And a code block is just a section of code that belongs together. Later, when we start getting into branching and looping, we'll see that, well, some code needs to just be conditionally executed, or some other code needs to be repetitively executed. So we use braces to define the start and end blocks of that code block, so the compiler knows, well, what are we repeating, or what operations are we performing specifically with this conditional branching. So they'll be important quite a bit later. Right now, we're just using one set of braces, and that's to constrain our main code. Now, in C++, there's two ways to do your braces. One is that you can do your brace on its own line, like this line 5 now. But I prefer to just save a line of code by putting that on the previous line, and that just saves us one extra line of code. It does help to put the closing brace on its own line, so we keep track of where everything lines up. Or in other words, to which opening brace does this closing brace belong? And that's it for the basic structure of a program. Now watch the video for output, where we will delve into line 6 and parse that and see exactly what this simple output string is doing. All right, good luck, everybody.